Hi, Simon.
Hi, Lisa. How's it going?
It's going good. I've been thinking about how it was almost a year ago that you and I started talking about doing this show.
I'm
Do
not
you?
sure we talked about it, or you just said, "Oh, okay, now you're
Yeah,
free. You can do this."
that's
That was
true.
more,
It wasn't really a discussion. That's true. I think I said we should do a podcast, and you were like, "Okay."
yeah.
it
You know
did.
what
It didn't take too much.
I miss about that is that we used to go do lunch while we were planning.
That's true.
I
Yeah,
need
we
to,
don't do that as much
yeah.
now.
We
But
should
the
do
fact
a.
that we were what? We should
It
do
would be
what?
fun to do a show from one of our favorite outdoor restaurants when it gets nicer.
Well, that won't sound good, I don't think, but
I don't know.
nice idea in theory.
Theory.
But the fact that it was almost a year ago, I can't believe that. And it's I always feel like at a year or like a it's usually annually or maybe quarterly. It's always a good time to look back and reflect on where you've been and then where you're going to go. And it's a little different for us because I think we have maybe about, around 20 episodes under our belt, or maybe this is the 20th
I
episode.
think this is 20.
20. And so we don't have quite a year's worth of being out there, but we had a lot of planning that we did ahead of time. And so, I thought it would be a good idea for us to talk about the idea of planning based on past performance, or like just reflecting back.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think it's important to celebrate the successes, right,
Hmm.
of at a year or whatever, but also take a look at what did we learn? How could we apply lessons? I think you and I have gotten better. We figured out a bit of our own style
Hmm.
for the show, and so,
Hmm.
but there's also data to look at and metrics and things like that. So, yeah, that sounds
Yeah.
good.
And then I think it's also, with using the example of us, it's just the two of us. We're the decision makers. We decide together how we want to move forward with things. But with small businesses, they grow. And so initially, maybe you're again, if you're a company with maybe fewer than 10 employees, you don't have to have anything really formal, but it's good to reflect back and say, how have we been doing? And I'm sure most small businesses are looking at their revenue, but you got to look at other things too. Like, are your processes in place? Are your, um, like, do you need to add additional marketing efforts? Initially when you're starting, maybe you're not doing that. So you got to reflect back on how things have gone, but then also what are the gaps? How are you going to grow? You have to have
Right.
goals associated with it.
I mean, it's fine to say that you have goals because every business that starts out has a goal, right? To
Mhm.
do something, make some money, whatever. But I think that planning is more than just setting goals, right? You have to have that strategy, right? Think
Definitely.
about, um, again, looking back, what did you learn that, if you don't look back and you're only looking forward, you're just going to potentially repeat things that were mistakes, right? Um, I think there's a lot of wisdom, if you will, in looking back. Even though we sort of think 2020, Monday morning quarterback kind of thing, but at the same time, even if you have 10 employees, sit down and have a conversation about what is going well, what might need to change, and what do you think that how that would impact the next year or whatever.
Exactly. And I feel like there's so many components to it. So if you were a small business owner, how would you start even? Do you know?
Start planning.
Yeah. And I use the example of us with annual. Like it's just sometimes it's a calendar year, sometimes it's I launched my company in the fall, and so therefore I want to see how have I been doing year over year? What changes do I need to make? And it's not just the kind of hard data numbers. There's also getting feedback from employees or customers. That's
Yeah,
another, we've talked,
absolutely. And
yeah.
we talked about research, right? You can use
Yeah.
research to figure out why people are happy, but that can be part of the data set. You should be looking at any sort of media numbers that you have. So if you're sending out emails, do you have a trend? If you're sending, doing social media, do you have followers? And how is that trending?
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think if you're getting into paid media where you actually have formal campaigns, you can look at those and go back and say, hey, that really worked well. Or I can think of an example at a company I was at where we launched a gift guide at Christmas. Now, this is a bigger consumer company, but the gift guide just didn't perform. Like we split emails and sent some there. We promoted it on the homepage. We tried a couple different strategies to compare it against, say, just sending people right to products or right
Mm-hmm.
to the offers page. And it took a lot of work to do that gift guide and come up with descriptions and really fun, like, this is the perfect gift for, your sports enthusiast or the family or whatever. And so we sort of had a postmortem. And then I remember right before the next Black Friday, right? Because it's always August, you start thinking about what you're going to be your planning for Black Friday, 3 or 4 months out. And we realized that the effort to build that gift guide just wasn't worth it. Like, we could still
Mm-hmm.
incorporate the sort of feeling and themes of giving and gifts, and this is perfect for somebody, but we didn't need to build a separate destination for it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a way to look back as you plan and build efficiencies.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have
Yeah.
anything pop to mind?
Well, in general, so here we are, we're always talking about being data driven. And so you were just giving an example where you saw the performance wasn't there. So it just
Right.
wasn't worth it. And I don't have a specific example, but in general, if you are constantly testing, that's also a way to kind of it's past performance technically where you're like, well, we did that and we know because we drove to two different destinations or whatever the case
Right.
may be, and then you can evaluate the level of effort there. One thing though I do want to mention is you talked about specifically this kind of Black Friday timeframe, and something didn't work, but let's say 3 years 4 years go by and people are still there and saying, oh, it didn't work, so we don't want to do that. Well, over time, sometimes you might want to revisit something like that
Absolutely.
because things change and the environment's different or whatever the case may be. So, but that's part of your kind of what you would weigh when you are planning.
Right. And I think
Um,
about that's a really good example, because what we could do on the web like 10 years ago and what you can do on the web today are very different. And 10
that's
years
true.
ago, incorporating video was a big lift, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now we can build little videos or snippets and they play right on the page and no one has to load any plugins. Flash.
Mm-hmm.
And and you can, to your point, you're innovating and you're saying, okay, it didn't perform because if we did it exactly the same way, that's the definition of insanity. It's probably
Yeah.
not going to perform. But if we
Mm-hmm.
take something and we're like, we can really improve it or optimize it, or based on other learnings, incorporate, functionality that we didn't have 2 or 3 years ago, absolutely, you
Yep.
should look at doing it again. But to your point, you should test it, right? You should run
Mm-hmm.
some sort of traffic test, and if you're dealing with e-commerce, like page conversion might be your measure of success, like, or even just click through at a higher level in the page, right? More click through on this than that, things like that.
Yeah, and you're actually making me think that
I'm
while
making you
there's
think.
you're making me think where if there's we've just talked about a way like we want to reduce inefficiencies, right? So
Absolutely.
so we test things and we say, okay, that didn't work, so we want to like get rid of that. There's also a risk of leaving money on the table, so to speak. So
Mm-hmm.
there's, you do want to do past performance looking at that, But then you can take that information and decide, I'm going to do something different that we haven't tried yet that could be an opportunity. So I think there's kind of two sides to the coin in this case of this planning
So
and looking back.
even give me, how about, can you describe that in a hypothetical fake company
I
way?
think you're trying to lead me somewhere. So why don't
No,
you
I'm not.
start?
I'm just
No?
trying to make
Okay.
sure we clarify.
Yeah.
If I'm saying, my point
Get rid
was,
of it.
if it's not performing, don't do it again unless
Correct.
you can significantly innovate on top of it.
So let's say we do something and we're like, well, that didn't work, and then we look into it deeper. So maybe the example that you gave, you're like, this gift guide just was terrible, and well, maybe you're like, well, we only were driving people to our website. Maybe that wasn't, and I know that's where the gift guide is, but let's say you're like, well, actually, if we drive people to someplace else, or it's a different audience that we haven't reached out to, like it's something you did not do. So it's kind of like you had a broad campaign that went to anybody. Maybe you decide, well, actually, in further analysis, we didn't really hone in on this group of people that we think would be better served for this kind of thing. And maybe it's worth it if you really then customize your message to that particular audience. That's just an example where it's like you didn't do it before. And it's
I
like
see what you're saying.
your analysis
Yeah.
made you wonder. And then you
Right.
could sort of create something else based on that. And that's more like a decision of like, just again, it's still that experimentation, which we're delving into kind of another topic that we've talked about before. But yeah.
Again, I think for today's topic, which is really about looking at what you've done in the past and incorporating all the metrics, right? To your point, like it may be web metrics, but you might also look at other customer satisfaction scores if you get
Mm-hmm.
those, or look at just purely your sales numbers or your click through. Again, I mentioned that earlier, the email. And I think you want to also incorporate those data points with the qualitative. So, did you do a customer survey? Is there something in the industry that you could look at? For example, we know that around the holidays, it's always about giving gifts. Maybe they're for yourself, or maybe
Mm-hmm.
they're for other people. And so, what can we learn from other research that might be out there on gift giving? Maybe there's like you were saying, there's audiences that are more tuned to gift giving. Maybe it's a disposable income. Maybe it's a type of gift, or I think in my head, $20 for a stocking stuffer to give someone a really cool consumer electronics experience, right?
Are you giving, this is not a promotion. This is not sponsored contact.
No.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to say their name, but everyone
Yeah.
can figure out who I'm
They
talking
probably
about.
already know. That's okay.
And so the idea is to, again, take all these data points. And again, we talked about bringing your staff together. I mean, maybe it's, the kind of thing that works as each team you do a little bit of an offsite almost where each
Mm-hmm.
team gets a chance to share. And then I think it's important that you sit together and identify what worked and why you think it didn't work or did work.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about each team, and it's like I feel like a lot of the smaller businesses are everybody does everything and everybody
Sure.
kind of pitches in on things. So they're I think it's probably more of a
Different
it's a
hat.
conversation. Yeah, you're right. What hat you're wearing at that time. But you know what? It can be more scrappy too, where it's just
Yeah.
like, hey, this is something that we've been doing. Can you give me feedback? So if you have a brick and mortar store, like you can ask the people that are, maybe in reception or the front desk or whatever and say, hey, it could be casual. Like, are there things that we've been doing,
I think,
in this past year that perhaps we want to reevaluate?
and not to plug us, but this is where you could bring in people. I am plugging in.
Yeah.
You can bring in people who understand your business.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're have a consultant, or maybe you have a friendly peer who maybe you don't compete with necessarily. But those are other thinking about, like you were saying, the scope. And again, online research about your particular business type and what is working and things like that. So,
Well, okay. So when we talk about evaluating past performance to then inform future planning, what are the some of the things that you should measure when you're doing this? We talked about revenue. We talked about what customer engagement, like with a click through rate or like how they
Mhm.
interact with your website.
Yep.
Did they, if you have any kind of formal support or people contacting you, like you can look at that as
Yeah.
a so customer engagement in that way. Your marketing campaigns, how they perform. Anything else that you should evaluate? Did
I
we
think,
say it all?
yeah, I think that just again, we're looking at web analytics, we're looking at social media analytics because these platforms all have reporting. We're talking about surveys, running surveys. We talked about those a couple weeks ago. You can create your own. So, all of those things are things to look at. So, and those are just the tools. Timeout.
I have a sidebar
Okay.
where you mentioned media and whatnot. I'm hoping that people aren't just going, oh, let's look back last year on how our media or
Mm,
email or whatever did. From the get go, you should always be looking at that. So I just want to mention that. And it's always good to have a consolidated view if you can with dashboards and where you look at your performance and then the dashboards, and this is almost like a plug for another episode, but what you want to you anything you're looking at should be actionable, and this is also advice for if you're working with a third party to help you with creating a dashboard to give you insight into your business. If it's just a bunch of charts and it's just a bunch of numbers and it's like, okay,
right.
I see that these are numbers, they have to be actionable. What would you do? What are you going to do with this information? If you can't glean any of that from what you're looking at, then it's not a useful tool. And
Right.
that's something also that you and I have experience in and can help with. Okay. And sidebar, back to the
Okay.
regularly
I
scheduled program.
I was just gonna add to that
Oh, so not in.
no,
This is an amendment to the
the
sidebar.
sidebar of marketing.
Yeah.
Um, just that if you to your point about dashboards and things like that, they don't have to be sophisticated, but you're right. I think that's where trends come in. And especially if you can look at multiple years, your first year is probably going to be a bit bumpy if
Yeah,
it's the first
baseline.
year, right? But if you start to see that the certain seasons for your business have peaks or valleys or whatever, those are things you can drill into. And that's why looking at a trends are very helpful. If you have
Mm-hmm.
nothing else to go on, it's like, oh, well, these are just today's or this week's traffic numbers or this week's sales. But if you look at trend over time and then you map it to things like, what were we doing? That's also important. We actually haven't really touched on that. So we're back to the regular episode, but you should have some sort of view that says this week a calendar, right? I
Mm-hmm.
launched this, I did this, I made this change, I reached out to these people, I added this staff, whatever it is. You should be tracking that as well to be able to look back and say, okay, when I did that 5 days later I saw a
I
dip
have a
or a
question.
yes.
In Google Analytics, in the previous version, not so you know how they introduced GA4, Google
Right.
Analytics 4.
In
In the
360
previous, yes, so well,
universal
the right in the previous version, you used to have the ability to kind of like mark a spot where you could put a
annotations.
note, annotations. Can you do that with the new version?
Ah.
One, and then can you do that with the was it Microsoft Clarity? Do you know?
Not with clarity, I don't
Okay.
believe.
Okay. Because
And
that's helpful. I
it
hope they didn't do
is.
away with that.
I, so if any of our listeners know GA4, I'm still GA4 is very different. All of you who may have switched from old
You
Universal
have to.
Analytics, you
You
had
had
to,
to.
but uh, that feature I don't know. So we'll have to see if someone, if you know, and just put it in the comment
Comment.
section or send us a note and we'll follow up.
Yep. So wait, I think I interrupted you while you were talking. So you were saying you
No.
need to have a calendar. Yeah, I always do. So if there's, you were talking about you need to have a calendar just to kind of help track where, I launched this day or
Yeah,
something along those lines.
and personally, I'm a huge visual person, so I
Me
love to
too.
see like a PowerPoint or even a Google spreadsheet or whoever that you can
Whoever.
whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, yeah, the problem is it is often whoever somebody remembers this, but nobody wrote it down. But any kind of project management tool, or even like I says, any kind of spreadsheet tool, just log when you do things in a sort of chronological way, so you can have the ability at some point to import data, build some cool looking charts that show you trends with these milestones.
And this is also a little bit of a sidebar where I have a pet peeve with any kind of reporting that is like from January 1st to March 31st, but it's one number. And it's kind of like, yeah, but what was the trend during those 3 months?
Oh, you just
So
what was the total sales
here's
for
the
the
click
first
through rate in
quarter?
that. Right.
Oh,
It
right,
makes
exactly.
me crazy.
No, that
And we've also talked about make sure if you are reporting on it, you write down this is where the source was that I got this from so
sure,
that anybody can reference it later. Cause
absolutely.
sometimes it's like, how
Do
did you
you
segment
think
that?
for a small business, what is the right cadence for, like you just mentioned, click through rate? Do you think it should be weekly, monthly? How often
I
would you
think,
do it?
I set up for clients, I set up a weekly report that goes out to them automatically. And
Yeah,
then that weekly report looks back 30 days. So at least it's being updated regularly. I mean, it's always updated, but
right.
from a like maybe they don't look at it every week, but at least it gives them an opportunity to within the last 7 days. So it's not 30 days old, for example.
Yeah, because I can't remember what I had for dinner last night. So if
Exactly.
I'm looking at a report that's a month old, I'm gonna like be, what do we do? And usually you don't get that report for a week or two into the next month, and you're already thinking about what I have to do going forward. So
Yeah, exactly.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I know. Yeah. Ugh, okay.
So
So,
what do you think?
well,
What do you think
I was
some
just
of
thinking of
the
the. A bit, a
go
bit,
ahead.
No, you go. I'm sorry. Typical.
I was just gonna say, so now you have all this data and from your past performance. What now? What like? How do you set some? Do you set goals again? Do you readjust your mission statement? Like,
Hmm.
how do you, what's the importance of the taking those lessons and turning them into a strategy?
Well, when you just mentioned, do I update my mission? So that's an interesting one that usually you would not update that regularly, but you need to revisit it. Like, is this
Right.
still true? Did we pivot in somewhere during the year and we're now adding this thing on? Or like, we've evolved, we've grown. And so now, so maybe it's a good time to do that. That feels like
Yeah,
an annual thing.
I agree.
Let's revisit, who are we? Are we still have the same
Who
mission?
are we?
Oh
Who,
no.
who, who? Oh, for all of you,
CSI.
yeah.
No, I mean I know it's the Who, but it's still like a lot of CSI intro. The Who.
Sorry.
Anyway, now you made me forget what I was saying. So okay, so do that every year. And we've talked about we have messaging. That's a whole other topic that you might want to revisit that yearly as well. But I think the other things are you start to look at your past performance from all these other things, like maybe it's marketing, maybe it's customer support. So even if you said teams earlier, and I was like, well, but functions, even if
Areas.
it's
Yeah,
areas, even if it's the same person that's doing things, but then you can look at all of those source points and say, okay, what are the areas that we need to improve upon? And then from there, I would then identify, okay, this is these are our objectives for the year. And then you might have quarterly milestones on how you are moving towards those objectives, and then probably goals, like if you want to increase revenue or whatever that is annually. What
and
else would
I
you add?
I would just say that on top of that, you have to be open to change and open to being
Yeah.
flexible.
Yep. Because what got us here is not going to get us there. I like that
Right.
expression.
And you have to, when things don't go as planned, like you have to be willing to change something,
Hmm.
right? And like you were saying, it might just be your audience, like who you're trying to target, or it might be the way you looked at it, right?
Hmm.
So but it's, I think, adapting and again being flexible and not worrying about how change is hard, but do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And I actually just thought of an example
Yeah,
where when you and I were at Adobe in
you said the
uh,
name.
I did, but you know, it is what it
Everyone
is. So
knows.
this was, and but also what I'm about to say is was public facing, so it's not, you know, a secret. Where at the time it was Creative Suite that we were working on. We had these 18-month software cycles. We planned that long.
Right.
Like, what are the features that are going in there? And then what's our go to market plan? All sorts of stuff. And there's a million people that are involved, not a million, but a lot of people that are involved with this whole thing. It's a big ship to turn around. So we had everything all ready. We were launching in the fall of 2007, CS4, and we had this
2008.
whole, no, it was 2007 because it was going into 2008. And maybe it was 2008. Okay, 2008. So we were going into it, and the whole campaign was shortcut to brilliant. And then the
I remember
economy
that.
tanked. There was this whole housing crisis, and everything tanked. And we had one person that said, "We got to change everything." She was a leader that you and I loved. I'm going to say her name, Whitney McCleary. She's no longer with us. Loved her. She said, "We have to tell people that it would cost them if they didn't upgrade." And so we changed everything to shortcut to savings. And we shifted everything around. We had all of these things about how the efficiencies gained if you moved to our new product, and it worked. I mean, and that was a big
That's
ship
true.
to turn around, but we did it and it helped us. Like, if we just said, well, that's what we did and we can't do anything about it, like, our sales would have probably been really poor.
Right.
But Whitney identified, this is how we're going to get around this, and she got everybody on board, and we did it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Hmm.
Did cause a lot of pressure for the people downstream, though. I will say that. All the
Yeah,
writers, the web
us.
producers,
Yeah,
all the
people that
creative.
people that we worked with. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
But
Yep.
it was a good decision, and again, that's a great example based on results, but also based on like a market change, right? So you
Right.
have to adjust strategy. So
Yep. Yep.
so what do you think
Exactly.
some of the things that people should try to avoid when they go through this process of planning and looking back to look forward?
I mean, I think the big one is just sort of ignoring the past. You know, like,
Because it's
you have to
uncomfortable.
remember. Yeah, maybe, or right, because I guess maybe that's or if
It's
there's
a
if it's a change in some people, maybe there also isn't the history there. So you at least have to, like,
right.
look, because maybe you'll repeat past mistakes that you're not aware of. You know, and then you need to kind of look at any other information
I
there.
mean, if you're a small business, I can imagine, and something doesn't work, you probably, there's a bit of pride. Like your pride is hurt,
Yeah, that's
and you're
true.
going to be
Yeah,
like, I don't really want to deal with this. But
yeah.
sometimes you got to dig in, right? Figure
Well, you
out.
know what? I mean, there's a lot of companies that have this, like, move fast and break things, and that's what that means. Is like, you know what? It's, just move on. You learn from that. If you broke something,
If you
try
broke
not to
it
make
though,
it.
you got to
Yeah,
admit that you broke it, and you
yeah,
got to talk
yes,
about why it
yep,
broke. Because
right,
if you're right, if you just sort of sweep it under the rug, you're not going to learn from it, right? Because it's out of sight, out of mind.
yep,
And I
yep.
think one of the companies we work for always did postmortems after big launches, and I feel like those were really valuable.
I would agree. And then I would also say sometimes there's, and I don't feel like this is as much as small businesses, but it could be, where, the CEO of a medium-sized company is like, well, I think we should do this, and they just sort of like, or I like, that better, and so people will Okay.
those dang executives.
And it's just like their gut, and while sometimes their gut might be right, if they
Yeah,
have a lot of that experience, but it's like, let's kind of, do we have data to back it, or at least
exactly.
refute it if it's not,
I mean, if somebody, you have leadership like that, that's fine. I think you come back with data to validate it so that everyone says, okay, that was a really smart thing, right?
Yep.
So they also probably have a
Yep.
track record of making really good decisions. So
Absolutely.
with or
Consider
without
it.
data, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So and
Definitely.
we both have worked for people like that who are pretty smart, as far as like
Yeah, I know.
vision casting and
Yep.
giving direction. I mean, even the example
Mm-hmm.
you gave about CS4, like
Mm-hmm.
that was sort of a knee jerk in a bit because you
That's
know
true.
but
Yeah, it was.
it was from someone who had wisdom.
And it was also well founded. Like, we
Yeah,
were like, people are panicking about losing their jobs and not having any
absolutely.
money. How do we address that? And I think it was the right message. It was like,
Yeah,
it's about efficiency. How can you not have this? You're wasting your time, which is your money.
right. I think the only other thing I might say, and this is where it's tricky, is the right metrics. It's
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
because we talk about tagging everything or tracking everything, but sometimes some of those numbers in what's the right word, in
Vanity.
isolation,
Oh,
no,
oh,
in
oh.
isolation they
Yeah.
don't mean anything.
Yeah.
So sometimes the right metrics are actually, like we've talked about, conversion rates or other calculations that give you more visibility into what's actually happening, right? A percentage can have a lot more power than just a number, right? And then percentage
Yeah.
over time. Yeah, thank you.
I ugh, yes. Amen. There's so many things. I think I need to do a whole thing about, I'll just do a 2-minute rant on another short video to just,
Oh, you're gonna, okay.
no, I'm not doing it now, but it's like, there's so many things about metrics that I get so angry. And I will just mention one little thing, that when Rob used to oversee the analytics team, he said, "We're not reporting the weather. Like, we are, or sorry, yeah, we're not reporting the weather. We're trying to give a forecast." And it's like, yeah, like I used to hate, like, oh, we got these clicks, this, like these very mundane numbers that
Well,
have no context. And it's like, so what?
right.
What are we
So
doing
what?
about that?
And
So what? What are
what
we
does,
doing about this?
yeah.
How can I act on this? You're just telling me, oh, you got, you know, 5 clicks and this many visits. Okay, well, where did they come from? How do we want, are we trying to improve that?
How
Like,
did
what,
they
like, what?
change from the week before?
Yeah, all those
What do
things.
we
It's
think the
just,
next week's going to look like?
I get
Yeah.
so, like, it's crazy how angry I get. Okay, end sidebar. Um,
And rant.
yeah, and rant, exactly. Ugh. Okay, so let's kind of summarize the things, because we, kind of talked about a lot of things and it's hard to follow sometimes, but we like talked about things that, like, you got to be data driven. I think that's a key tenet to everything that we say.
Absolutely.
And some people might think, oh God, I hate numbers, so find
And then,
somebody else to help you with that,
yeah,
if it's
and
not your thing.
you don't have to look at everything, right?
Hmm.
Again, you don't need not everyone needs a dashboard, right? Things like
Well,
that.
you don't think so? So, all right, another sidebar, third one of the moment. But I think that there is something at every level of an organization that is useful to them. So the CEO or the owner, whoever it is, there's probably high level things they want to say. They don't need to see how
Hmm.
many clicks and visits
True.
came to your
Okay.
website. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's some high level key performing indicators for them
You know
to
what?
be aware of.
Ding, 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 ding.
Key performing indicator, KPI.
KPI. We didn't talk about that at all,
No.
but those are to the point about not tracking everything or not tracking the right metrics. Up
Mm-hmm.
front, I think a part of being data driven is to figure out what your KPIs are.
Mm-hmm.
And we could have a whole nother discussion about
I know.
KPIs because
We need to do that.
there's the big ones, right? That sort of tell you the health of your business, and there's other ones that we call levers, right? Or they're leading indicators, where these
Mm-hmm.
are things, if we adjust them, how do they fit affect the master KPI, but that's a whole nother story.
Well, I want to touch on that just for 1 second since you brought it up. So
All right.
let's say your KPI is we're going to get this many sales on our, and it's a goal, right? It's just like the certain number of sales generated from your website. Well, a leading indicator is this is how many people added to cart. And then another leading indicator is this is how many people we actually got to the site. And, so there's all these things like what are all the steps
Right.
that lead up to, and those are the levers you can change. So if you're not getting a lot of people adding to cart, that is like the conversion rate too. How many people? Yeah. Then maybe there's something broken on there. And so you have to look at that. Or, you don't get as many visits on the site. Maybe you've got to look at increasing your advertising spend to drive more people to your website. So it's actionable. And that's the thing that I feel like a lot of people don't understand. And it also makes me crazy.
All right. So any other big
that was number
takeaway?
So then applying what you've any kind of insights in their past performance, you apply that to your future planning, I would say is the next.
Be flexible, be willing to try something new, be willing to throw something out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I had a teacher in art school that said, sometimes you have to kill your children. And we were all like, 18-year-olds just out of high school. And he was like, is this a good idea or a bad idea? Sometimes you just need to kill your children. And we're like, presenting our child, to play. And we were like, okay. So I developed a thick skin pretty early on in my professional career, thanks to that teacher.
But I guess so. I was going to say it's a bit like a wedding where it's like something old, something new, something borrowed. There are really great examples of what's worked on other people's website that you might be able to incorporate, or other people's ad campaigns or different things like that. And then the blue thing is the Google figured out that that's the best color for buy now. So
wow. Okay.
Yeah. That was a good stretch, huh?
Yeah.
And
geez.
so
I was like, where's this wedding thing going?
I know. And then I think that the last thing is really just, again, don't rely too much on your gut. It's good because a lot of people have really great business sense and they do have the wisdom and the experience, but also validate it or, back it up with some sort of data driven statement or whatever.
Yep. Cool.
All
Last
right.
thing, I want to know, what should I put on that wall? It's kind of boring. Simon and I were talking about that. So if there's any ideas of how to zhuzh it up, let us know.
Well, and I was going to say, let's do lunch. Like Lisa and I'd love to have lunch with y'all, some of our listeners out there. Yeah.
You're crazy.
I'm not paying.
Okay.
Well, I'll go Dutch or whatever. Is that appropriate? Can I use that?
I don't know. Probably not.
We'll all pay ourselves.
Yes. Well, all right. So from tangents to tactics,
it's mostly marketing.